I'm Ace, and I'm here with Alicia, and we are very blessed to be joined this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at, by Brother Kyle Toon. How are you this morning?
I am doing well. My spirit is light, and thank you so much for having me. I've been eyeing the podcast, eyeing the content, and I'm so glad that we were able to collaborate and come together. So thank you for having me, and I am blessed and grateful.
Yeah, no, many thanks to you for taking the time to join us this morning. It's a collaboration we've been working on for a while. Our apologies for the issue at the NASW conference. I got locked out of the whole exhibition hall, so um,
It's all good. I figured that when I got your email and I saw that you were locked out, I was like, well, I'm looking forward to do this out of the conference. So I'm so glad that we were able to adjust and make it happen.
yeah. Well, the positive side is we have Alicia here, so
Yeah, that's what I was
Beautiful.
excited about. I was so confused that day because the time difference. And so when I woke up and I was like, oh, it's not happening. What's going on? But I was glad that I could be here too. So thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely.
yeah, well, this is our first time all getting to know each other and having a dialogue. I know we've all seen some videos and checked each other a little bit, checked each other a little bit out online and all of that, but we really haven't had a chance to get to know each other. So I thought we could start with that. And first of all, what do you prefer that we call you? KD, Kyle?
Yeah. So yeah, KD is like my family name, the name that I grew up listening to. I used to only reserve that to those uh, family members and kinfolks that I grew up around, but I have completely kind of brought that out from my family and kin network and said, okay, I'm opening that up to the public, to those who are like minded, and we share in consciousness. So yeah, brother KD's fine, brother Kyle, whichever one that comes out, I accept it wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And there's always a power in a name, and it reminds me a little bit of mine because Ace is my middle name, and I
Mhm.
didn't like it as a kid because people made fun of me for it. But then family always kept it. But then it got readopted just by close friends, and then my students picked it up and started calling me Professor Ace. And so it's something that I've become reacquainted with in recent years, and actually enjoy now. Something that was a negative turned it into a positive. So I can see
I
the
think that's beautiful. I mean, it really does bridge the gap, and it also kind of creates a portal from my world to yours. Yes, you could just call me Kyle, very formal. That's listed on my on my birth certificate. But KD is very, like you said, Ace is it's rooted in a family tradition. It's rooted in community. It's rooted in upbringing, and bringing that forward and saying this is who I am authentically. I think that really that's the power of self in actualization. So I resonate with you, brother.
yeah, and a big reason I'm able to be my authentic self, and it's able to have been reemerged in this later adult life.
Mm. It's been cool to see that. Like you say, that kind of that self work that happens in the evolution where you then claim something that at one time it had some negative connotations to it. And it's been cool to really see that with you with the name Ace.
Yeah. Well, we're not even oriented with you quite yet. I don't think.
Yeah,
You're in Colorado right now, right? But what's your
absolutely.
background? What's your history? Your wherever you want to start at your ancestry, all the way up to where you grew up, and I know you went through the military, and now
Mhm.
you're in social work. Take us to where you come from and where you're at now.
Absolutely. And I wanna definitely bring my ancestors into the room because everything and anything that I do, I don't do in a isolative vacuum or isolative silo. And so I want to bring my grandmother Mary Toon, my grandfather in the room, Patrick Toon, my aunt and my uncles that I've lost over the last few years. On my biological side, on my biological father's side, I want to bring in my grandfather, uh, Charles Jessamy, who was a World War II veteran. My grandmother Elaine Bay. So I want to bring them into the room because I want them to kind of flow and work through me. And I want to represent them positively and with courage and authenticity. So yeah, just to, my background, I grew up in Southern Maryland. I grew up in Southern Maryland, and I grew up to a single mother, and I grew up with my grandfather. He transitioned when I was about 3 years old, and so my grandmother, she was the matriarch of the family, and she had an older sister, my great aunt. They both migrated from North Carolina to Maryland, and they together kept the family coherent, cohesive, and organized. I living in Southern Maryland. Southern Maryland is when I grew up, it was a lot of agriculture, a lot of fishing and crabbing due to the proximity to the Chesapeake Bay. I grew up eating a lot of seafood. I grew up in a religious upbringing. I grew up Baptist, the Baptist church, and yeah, my mother, she did the best she could with what she had available due to a lot of life circumstances that have affected her life and the trajectory of her life. And my grandmother was that she was really pinnacle in being a stabilizing person within me, my cousins, my brother, my sister, like all of our lives, because not only was her faith infectious, it was her love. And that's why I talk so much about love, is because my grandmother taught me the essence of positive regard and unconditional love. And so I grew up in a very, very close knit family system. And by extension, the church family was very close knit as well. And so as time went on, I ended up joining the military at 17. I stayed in the military for about 14 years. I got out March 2023 due to conscientious objection, basically saying that no, I am in full disagreement of the culture of war and the degradation of humanity. And but through my military career, I got married to my high school sweetheart. We've been together since we were 17. I have three beautiful children. I got a 12-year-old, I got a 9-year-old, which is my girl, and then I have a 2-year-old who's going on 20. and so and so I transitioned to social work January 2023. I was in the marriage and family therapy program at first, and I was halfway done. And then I really started really looking at that being more therapeutically oriented. And I was like, well, what happens when I don't want to do therapy anymore? What happens if I get into this and I realize that maybe eh, just being a therapist is not enough? And that's when I started speaking to a bunch of counselor educators, and they were letting me know about social work. And it's like, well, if I would have done it over again, 15, 17 years later, I would have went social work. And I've heard that from three different um, professional counselors. And so that's when I decided to take the shift. And I already was going through guilt, shame, and resentment for being in military intelligence. And um, And so I was like, okay, I want to realign with the rehumanization, not only of myself, but of society. So how do I do that? And I was like, oh, therapy is just kind of really, just really narrowly focused. I want to be more broad. I want to be more system oriented. And so that's how that led me to social work. And so, yeah, in essence, in the snapshot, that's who I am. And I am of African descent. I'm been married for almost 13 years. Well, actually 13 years. And um, family is like my center of my universe. So nothing that I do, um, everything that I do is centered around their needs, interests, which it also extends to the generation that's after me, that of the unborn as well. So That's brother KD in a snapshot.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I'll let you ask a question, but I just wanted to
Hmm.
say, much respect to you, just the way that you speak about family, and I already kind of knew it from listening to you in a few other venues, but um, I think that it's one of the few things that I respect more than a man who not just respects and orients himself around his family, but it vocally does so because it's often kind of counterculture to our society today. You know what I mean? Kids are not supposed to be around. Um, they're supposed to be separate. Oftentimes, they're looked at as a burden to what we got going on. But I shouldn't say I always, but in recent years, since I've had children and been able to reflect, have completely transitioned how I view myself and my responsibility to the world from, it's not my responsibility to, not saying I don't have any responsibility, but it's not my primary responsibility to argue with my grandfather or so and so about politics. It's about instilling the values into my children. And that's how I
Mhm.
truly will change the world from my perspective. Yeah,
Ashe.
we involve our kids in pretty much everything that we do.
Yeah. And I would say that that's something that I've appreciated so much from Ace is that that's his core. Like our family is completely his core. And the same for me too, but the way that he brings all of us into anything he does, it's contagious, and I
Mhm.
think maybe I wouldn't have had as much as that if you hadn't led the way in it. So I appreciate both of you as men, as fathers, for being that light for your family to show everybody that you can send to your family and still have a wonderful career and social life and all of this. Um, so yeah, I appreciate both of you for that. One thing that I was going to ask you, if you do you mind going back a little bit to the military of when that shift happened, and I'm guessing it wasn't just like one day waking up and realizing military intelligence, there was things not aligning with your values. But can you take us through that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I also want to affirm, just from you all's perspective and standpoint of bringing it together and including the children into your activities. And I think that that was very important. That's very important for my wife and I. And she too looks at me to be like okay, let's synthesize this. Let's bring values, principles, and activity together. And she looks to me for that, to be the example and the model for that. And then in return, I'm noticing that my wife is becoming way more proactive in that sense, especially since I came from a more family oriented upbringing than she did. I had an entire community uh, that surrounded me, from when I came out the womb all the way up until I went and got on the bus to go to military boot camp.
Mm.
But to really, the thing about what I've learned about conscious is that especially when you are in very um, indoctrinating systems, or yeah, indoctrinated systems, is that and that indoctrinating system becomes the default to your ideology, your values, your morals, which then feeds into the way in which your consciousness is extended out to other people through activity, through self creation, etc. Is that what I've learned? And I didn't know this obviously as a 17, 18-year-old, but that I became so brainwashed, or in the words of Dr. Bobby White, I was a victim of menticide, the systemic destruction of the liberated mind. And I didn't realize just how brainwashed and programmed I was until about 2014. And I remember it vividly. We were in Germany, in Wiesbaden to be exact. And I was a sergeant in the army. And I just, every ounce of my being dedicated myself to ascension and upward mobility and status within the military power structure. And I came home one day, and my wife is very revolutionary and always has been. Is that she asked me? This was right after the death of rest in power, uh, our little brother Trayvon Martin, and she was so fired up, so angry, filled with grief, filled with resentment and rage. And she asked me, and I was quiet, came home quiet, didn't say anything, noticing, but don't know how to attune to her or to the situation. She asked me, she said, "What is your position in all of this?" And my exact words was, "Well, it sucks." That was my response to a young black boy being gunned down and being brutally murdered. It sucks. And my wife really held the mirror of reflection up to me and said, "You are a black man." And at the time we had two kids with the young black boy, and you are training soldiers, and you are a leader in your organization, and you have so much to say when it comes to things related to the military system. But when it comes down to your own people, you only have 3 words to say. And she walked away. She walked away. She said nothing else to me. And I, because I've always been self-reflective, I went into my room and I was like, wow, like who I asked that very, philosophical question of who am I outside of the uniform and the combat boots? Like who am I? And I didn't have an answer. And that's when it began. Around 2014, that's when I began to study and I began to go through a full identity reconstruction. And so by the time 2020 hit and George Floyd, the public display of his of police brutality, excuse me, and we were in a state of emergency, and for about 4 or 5 months, I didn't leave the home. We didn't leave. A lot of us didn't leave the home, and I sat with myself in quiet contemplation, and I kept reading and I kept writing poetry specifically. Kept reading, I kept writing, I kept praying, I kept interrogating and inventorying my self-concept and my self-identity. And that around that time, around 2020, 2021, I started to transition to interrogating that deep misery that that it was it was this deep misery that I was feeling every time I put on the uniform that I just ignored. I really just I was like, it's maybe because I just don't want to come in today. But I was like, no, it was every day. And I deployed and it happened when I was there. And then, I'll come back and I'll just feel this sense of disgust with myself. And around 2021, I literally took it to Google and I said, and I typed in something about uh, not wanting, not believing in war. I think I wrote something like that into the search engine, and what came up was conscientious objection, objector, and the GI rights hotline to speak with the counselor. And when I spoke with the counselor for an hour and a half, the last thing that she said to me, she said, "Kyle, everything that you're describing to me it reflects the belief system of a conscientious objector." And so it was a period for almost about 8 years of just trying to do both, be in the military, become more consciously aware of Malcolm X's teachings and Martin Luther King and Martin Delaney and um, Marcus Garvey. And as my consciousness evolved and it expanded, I was trying to do both. And that created more dissonance. And so by the time that I had to sit with myself, that's when I was, I was able to put language to the feeling and to the state of this dissonance and this disconnection that I was having.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful story. And it takes me back, you know, when to go back to Trayvon Martin for a minute. I was a little bit, I should say, a lot more naive back then. And I mean naive about the views of the rest of the country or the rest of the world or other people. And I was up in Barrow, Alaska, now known as Utqiagvik, up on the Arctic Ocean, living with an Inupiaq Eskimo community. And for the most part, I mean, there's other people there too. And working for the Arctic Slope Native Association. And I remember reading about Trayvon Martin. And I was not so privy to such things at the time. You know, it was just something that came across the news feed or something like that. And I read about it, and like it seemed like a no-brainer for me at that time. Like, why wouldn't you support this young man, this boy that you know had essentially been murdered when you read through it? And I remember I sent out an email sharing it to everybody at the which we were connected to the hospital, and I was quite surprised by the blowback. And I was told not to, you know, politicize things in the workplace. But it seemed like common. I didn't understand why that was political at that time. It seemed pretty common sense to me. Um, but you know, since then, there's been a lot of different incidents. I think Tamir Rice was another one that I didn't quite understand
Hmm.
why there was. What's the let me rephrase this. I did like with Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin specifically, amongst others. I was really shocked as I went through these things at how desensitized we are
Yeah.
as a people to their to what happened to them. And you can go further to the, you know, you're talking about some of the adults as well, like George Floyd. But it's just something that I still don't quite understand. I think I understand it a little bit better, but it still kind of shocks me when I talk to certain people at times and they minimize it, and they seem desensitized to it. In other words, what I would think that their morals or what I think their values are should lead them to caring more about those situations. And on the other hand, it seems as if what do you do about it besides talk about it? I'm also conflicted about those things. You know, we can talk to our kids, we can teach our kids and things like that, but and it makes me question: am I desensitized to it as well? And I am to a certain degree because it's happened so often, and you you know it's hard to know exactly how to respond or what to do. And
Hmm.
how's been your
Hmm.
process on it, Alicia?
I think I was so naive to it with Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin, and it wasn't until George Floyd is when that really shifted, and there was just a lot of, I think, at that point, maybe I was missing it before, but I noticed a lot more societal anger and uproar about it. And that's when I didn't know what to do with that anger and uproar. And I would be putting things, I remember I changed my email signature. I can't remember what I put, but I changed it. And then there was blowback to that. I was working at a dialysis clinic at the time. And it was just not knowing where to put the energy. What do we do with it? Um, and I think for us, the podcast has been a way for us to talk about these things, but still, I mean, that's not enough. But then is what else do we do? And I think that's been my struggle the whole time. Of what do we do with that energy?
Well, to bring it back, I think you called it did you call it a conscientious objector to war? Is that what you
Yeah.
called it?
Yes. Conscientious objector to war. Yep.
Yeah, so if we could just situate ourselves right now,
Mm,
obviously one of the deeply troubling things is what's going on in Palestine and what has been going on now for a while now. I mean, actually, you know, this is only the most recent chapter. It's been going on for much longer than most of us even are aware of. Um, it's something that when I examine my value system, it's something that I conscientiously object to a large degree. But at the same time, I found myself struggling to figure out my place in how to deal with it. I have had conversations about, you know, writing a letter, for example, to my social work department or to the larger College of Liberal Arts at the university. And I don't know how everyone stands on it, so I'm not really, you know,
Mhm.
criticizing them by any means. Um, but I feel like it's something that it's the thing of our times right now in this as we're living and breathing right now. And if we're not going to respond somehow now, then when will we respond? And you know, they're taking the I work for the university. Well, they take money out of my paycheck to send over to contribute to what's happening over there. And at the same time, it's the number one thing I've had blowback on when I've talked about it on a podcast. It's the number one thing that people will write me and tell me I don't know what the f I'm talking about, essentially, and that we got no business about it. Um, and I have students that kind of fall on opposing, I shouldn't say opposing sides, but different perspectives. And I don't know. Again, it's what do I do about it besides talk about it here and there on the podcast? What is our role in it? And we haven't lived in um, like an area where there would have been major protests in big cities or anything like that. We've been back and forth between Alaska and rural Hawaii, and so we've talked about this a lot. But I don't even know where I fit in it. I know what I believe and what I stand on, but
Mhm,
Hmm.
I'm
mhm.
in this position where I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's what I feel like. It's the energy is there, and like where to put it. And no, brother KD,
yeah,
how do you manage that for yourself?
yeah. That's valid. I mean, I think when it comes down to, you know, first things first, and I love the way that you two conceptualize revolutionary social work is that it begins with you, and
Mm.
that the spirit. That's where you can't extend yourself until the spirit and the consciousness is revolutionized and is going through a constant um, reconstruction and reevaluation of that process is it's always enduring because the social and political climate and landscape is ever changing, and reality, social and cultural, are constantly at odds with each other, and it's constantly, and we're all being bombarded with different interpretations and meanings of reality. And so the best way that I think about as you were speaking, and I'm picking up on the like the puzzlement, like, okay, like I have I'm grounded, through these values. I want to reaffirm and I want to dignify humanity. How do I do that without creating a a cause and effect with my own context? And it makes me think about brother Kwame Ture when he talks about revolution, and he talks about how to reform is to mobilize, and to revolutionize is to organize. And I just think that that in itself, the development of the podcast, is a testament to not only your revolutionary spirit, but your willingness to kind of enact revolutionary change. And when I and so I kind of did the same thing. I started with myself, started with self-knowledge, started with peeling back um, and going through history and cultural heritage, looking at the Black Panther Party, looking at Jim Crowism, looking at um, all the different Black neighborhoods and Black communities that were um, fully owned and operated uh, by people of African descent, looking at the revolutions in Haiti, the revolution in Jamaica, the revolutions all throughout the continent. And I just try to pull from that the essence of it. I don't need to know every single detail, but I want to pull the essence from it and say, okay, how does that resonate with me through my strengths, my talents, my gifts, and also my power and privilege that I have? And then what is the best way for me to kind of to use that to improve, raise the alarm if I need to, and enhance not only me and everyone around me, but also society. And sometimes that is, and sometimes that it's not loud. That's the thing about revolution. It's enduring, and it's a permanent struggle It's a permanent struggle. So it doesn't need to be, us out there as activists. Maybe it is us having, excuse me, conversations. And I know you mentioned the talk. I heard you talk about the talking circles, Ace, and that bringing politicizing conversations, politicizing dialogue, to not shying away from the geopolitical context that we are all inadvertently and directly impacted by. And then, the revolution, like who leads the revolution? Children.
Mm.
Mm.
So it's the inculcating those values and principles into them, that warrior and revolutionary spirit into them, to be able to divine reality in their own terms. So I think that there's so many different ways to do it. I know sometimes we look at it as being activists or doing something that is affects legislation and laws and policy, but it's also very much how are you creating revolution within your own family situation and system? How are you creating that warriorhood and that warriorship and being able to self-determine and self-define what it is that is vital to the survival and the survival and the growth and development of your people. And so I think, yeah, I hear it and I see it with the children, with students. Alicia, I've heard you talked about your clients and doing the yoga, and I've read all of these circle of what is it, the
Circle
circle
of
of
self.
self.
Mm-hmm.
That's getting people grounded, regrounded back to what is vital to not only the recognition of the fullness of humanity, but also how do you express it. And I think that there's so many different ways to do it. That's not, you don't have to have the spotlight over you, So
Yeah,
Yeah, I needed to hear that. I
for
appreciate it.
sure.
I'm glad you brought up talking circles because a talking circle is a revolution in itself, right? It's going around, you're revolving around the circle, and it's a place. It's one of the few places that I've had actually on the podcast. We haven't had too many arguments, but it's devolved sometimes into these political arguments that don't really push us forward. But I've facilitated thousands of talking circles, I think, at this point, and I have never experienced an argument within the talking circle, not one time. And
Mm,
that's even when I think about that and reflect on it, it seems really miraculous that there hasn't been. But I think the talking circle is revolutionary in the sense that oftentimes in today's world we think that we have to chastise somebody or we have to tell them the way that it is, and they're just going to snap their fingers and switch their perspective. But that's not going to happen because people
mm,
have at least their own perceived life experience and the way that they perceive things, and it doesn't happen that way. And I think the talking circles are beautiful because it allows everybody to express their truth, and sometimes somebody might have a different truth on the other side of the circle, but it doesn't invalidate it because it's different than our own. Yet at the same time, by the essence of participating and being present and listening to everybody else's perspective and everybody else's truths and experience, then it allows for a gradual shift. So they may not snap their fingers right then, but they might notice that contradiction within themselves when they heard
mm,
somebody else's story, somebody else's perspective, somebody else's experience, which doesn't align with how they perceived things before. And so they say, even to myself, I hated them at first, to be honest with you. And it took some time, and I had to sit in there and say, hey, you know what? This is my story. I am a part of this. And I started to notice those contradictions. And it makes me think about what you call liberation social work. And when I think of the word liberation, there's a lot of different ways you could look at it: being liberated from prison, or being liberated from slavery, or liberating yourself from those things. Um, but I think there's also a deeper sense there that ties into revolution, and where we're saying starting with the self. If you looked at Malcolm X, for example, if you read his story, that liberation maybe happened in his mind and his heart
mhm,
first before anything. He was still in jail, he was still in a
Yeah.
cell
mhm,
at that time. And you hear Bob Marley talk about emancipate yourself from mental slavery. You hear these things. Marcus Garvey's obviously talked about it. Um, what what is liberation to you,
yeah.
and how does that tie into social work? I'm sure that there's so many parallels between revolutionary social work, but
Oh my goodness. Absolutely. And I remember when I came across the Revolutionary Social Work podcast. It was actually by accident. I came across of it via the YouTube. And I forgot. I think I don't remember I don't remember the content, but it was just the fact that, in bold letters, revolutionary social work. And I was like, wow. I said that is a very courageous and authentic stance. And I was, me kind of building and developing and liberation and social work. I was like, man, it just they are mutually exclusive. The revolution is, like I said, is a constant struggle for freedom, justice, equality, for emancipation, mind, body, spirit. And liberation is that, for me, it starts with the worldview, your conceptual universe, everything that flows from human consciousness. It's rooted in a understanding, an understanding of reality, an understanding of how human nature and humankind really is positioned in the cosmic universe. And also your worldview is also, it embodies values. It embodies the different ways in which we acquire knowledge and transmit knowledge, And so that's kind of where, that's my focus for liberation. I know that there's different ways to be liberated, like the actual process of being liberated from systems of oppression. I, I my assumption is that my assumption is that when we're talking about control, or the balance of external and internal locus of control, the thing that you can control the most is your conceptual universe.
Yes.
Um, and so that's why I focus more on that. I do know that social, you have liberation health, social workers that works, specifically within the medical and healthcare system. But this is outside the system. This is community centered. This is about collectivity. This is about Sankofa, going back through your heritage, through your history and your culture, and grabbing from it the essence of the accomplishments, the achievements, the downfalls, the everything, and then bringing it back to the present to inform not only your present self but also your future self. And so my I give a definition of liberation like the untethering of the soul from alien consciousness. And that's because you have to also have to recognize within liberation and within the revolution is that there is a system of oppression, and that there is a global what Dr. Cress Wilson would call the global system of white supremacy. And so when you realize that that's what really like inhibits, thwarts the freedom to express, to really affirm one's humanity, then that realization kind of makes it known that, okay, well, yes, systems obviously needs to change, but there is also something that we can control within our own tribal, village, family, and kin networks. And that's our worldview, the way in which that we orient ourselves to nature, to ourselves, to each other. And so that's my focus for liberation, um, is to develop our own sense of meaning and of purpose, of interpretation, etc., that is not superimposed by Eurocentricity, or what Dr. Wade Nobles calls scientific colonialism, the falsification of information and ideas. So
Yeah. That reminds me, as you're talking, it just reminded me of um, what Eddie Africa once told me, the great revolutionary from the MOVE organization. He was talking to me. We were corresponding through letters, and was telling me I had all of this energy again, and what can I do with it? How can I change the systems? And he reminded me, you cannot change the system from within the system.
Hmm.
You have to walk away and let it crumble, and change yourself and reimagine something else. Like you're saying, working on your own worldview, working on what you do have control of, and all what we are all building and evolving, this revolutionary worldview and ideas. And yeah, I love that idea that we can be the ones to take control of our own mindset and our own worldview and make a huge impact, but it's enduring. It's not this
Yeah,
one step and then bang and it's over.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a complete re-socialization
Hmm.
of of you, of your people, of your children, of your children's children. And so when you create a new way of interacting and relating and of being and of doing and of knowing, then that has generational impacts. And so
Hmm.
when you are that then so that's the whole point of any revolution. When if you look at Move in Philly, or if you look at the Black Panther Party, or you look like the AARP, like when you look at all these different organizations, not only do they work on self, but it's a continuous perpetuation of self-knowledge. That's why a lot of them do political education classes and self-study and all of that. And then they bring and the family is a part of it. It's not just the adult, or the young adult. It's really it becomes a family pursuit. And Malcolm X was parents was a Garvey or were Garveyites, both of them. And so that the revolutionary spirit was that seed was sowed while he was living in Nebraska as a very little kid. And yeah, it took some time for it to blossom. But that's the thing, is that and he became one of the most influential, most powerful leaders within the Black liberation struggle, um, and everything like that. And so that's it is. It's very systemic. It's not just us. Yes, it's not just us. It's how we model it to other people. And not everybody's gonna join the revolutionary train. That's the thing. That's not
Not
gonna
every.
happen. Not everybody is going to look at social work with a critical lens and then say, okay, how can we bring in different paradigms to support the functioning and kind of eradicate some of these systemic failures that are perpetuating these conditions, poverty and joblessness, etc. And so, um, yeah, we got to sow the seed, and that's the big thing. You sow the seed, and then you continue to nourish it, within yourself and with all the people around you. And then, like this, when you meet people that are like-minded, as far as what anchors you, your values and your ideals and all of that. This is how you organize revolutionary spirit. I'm not trying to make it seem like I'm an expert in all of this, but that's something that I took when I 2014. I told myself that I was going to, reculturize or re-Africanize my spirit, because it had completely been I've been completely you know, deprogrammed and institutionalized
Hmm.
just to be a military asset. And that's it. And that's all.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things that you articulated was that revolution or liberation is not something that you achieve like a goal or something that you get to. It's something that you have to constantly work towards. It makes me think of going back to the Move organization. John Africa, the former leader of the Move organization, he would say that if your heart didn't revolutionize, you would die. If your lungs didn't continuously revolutionize, you would die.
Mhm.
And so, in order to have a revolutionary spirit or to work toward that, it has to be a constant process. And in the chat, Monica brought up a good point. She said, "There's always so much more to learn, and even about ourselves." but people will still be shamed for even trying to educate themselves. And I think that goes
Yeah.
back to what we were talking about at the very beginning about our culture is kind of counter to that, meaning just the broader American or Western culture. It's counter to that, and I think um, what song is that from Luciano, where he talks about that his goal is to liberate the captivated mind, and I think he's talking about
Mm,
himself and others through his music,
mhm,
um, and
mhm,
that's part of our or a major part of our problem, right? Is that we're so captivated in everything. Everything is captivating, whether it's sports or politics or the media or TV, movies. Everything is to captivate us and captivate our mind. And it's almost like that's our jail to a sense. Is it's captivating us and it prevents us from. Um, it restricts us from being able to have that revolution in our mind and our hearts. And it takes somebody or something to plant a seed and for that to grow. Any thoughts, Alicia?
Yeah, no, I think
yeah,
that's such a good point, Monica, because there's oftentimes where, especially like family structures and or social structures or in employment, where you feel as though wait, something is a little off, like Brother KD has been talking about with your military experience, but you are shamed for trying to step outside of the box or to learn something different or to take a new perspective. And then when some people do take that new perspective, they're shunned from whatever group we're talking about, pushed out, and that's their support system. And so it's very hard to step away from that. Um, so I'm glad you brought that up.
On the
yeah.
on the counter side to that, though, is I'd say two things that are very uplifting and heartening for me in this moment is that one, when I bring revolutionary social work to my
Mm,
students, when I have them and I have their attention in my courses, I almost get unanimously extremely positive feedback and reflections. This is what I've been looking for. Why isn't anybody else talking about this? So the the want and the need is there, and I think
mhm.
people are receptive about it. It's about
Mhm,
breaking through everything else that's captivating folks' minds, to get to that, because like I said, everybody's so captivated, and this time more than all we get hundreds of emails, and there's not that long ago, YouTube would have been much more like an infant compared to what it is now with everything that's going on out there.
mhm,
Mhm.
And the other thing would be that the more that we've pressed forward and developed these ideas and shared them, the more meaningful the relationships that have come about from it, like you reaching out to us. But I can go through, I could talk about it forever. The how much more deep, I guess I'd say, the level of relationships of folks that have reached out and said, hey, I've been thinking this way too, or hey, I heard you and it sparked this in me,
Yeah.
and it's almost overwhelming to a degree, and there's responsibility that comes with that too, right? Because
mhm.
if you're putting the stuff out there and somebody's reaching out to you and saying, hey, this did this for me, or I heard you say this, then you have to be willing to take the time to meaningfully respond. um,
Yep.
but those two
Yeah.
things, are things that give me encouragement to keep pushing forward whenever because it's inevitable at times I'll get a little bit discouraged of all the work it takes, or when
Mhm.
things don't hit the way that I hope they would or something like that. There's always my students that are reflecting to me, but also folks that are reaching out with these very meaningful conversations, these dialogues, these connections, and that I can see the light. I guess is what I would say.
I think that also speaks to how the self work and working on what we can control within ourselves, why that is so powerful, because the ideas and the values that we have, if we just went and kind of preached it all to everybody and said you have to take this and believe it, that's not as powerful as us living it, and it's constantly evolving between us, within us, and then just sharing it with the world. And I'm reading a book called Herback. I don't know if you've heard of it, from ancient Egypt, and it's about a boy. He's first called Chickpea, and a mentor kind of sees this special spirit and power in him and mentors him to get to the point of Herback. But there was one thing I read to you the other day where his mentor, Chickpea, was getting very frustrated seeing corrupt priests in the community and people being very faithful to them and paying their tithe, but the priests were not in themselves very good people. And he was thinking, I need to do something about it. What can I do? and his mentor is saying, what is your aim? What is your end goal? Are
Mhm.
you trying to force people to change, or are you trying to change yourself?
Mm.
And it helped him see, okay, I he's still frustrated, but he's taken that step. I need to change myself. And then his mentor also goes on to say, helping people is not about, people are not, how does he explain it, like dough or bread. You don't just knead them into what you want them to be. You have to step back and you have to work on yourself, and then people will see those values and those ideas, and they will want that too for themselves, and it ripples out. And I think that's just everything we've been talking about, right? And why these things are so powerful, why liberation social work and revolutionary social work are so powerful in themselves, because they're value based and they return to the self, which is what we can all control.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I would love to, I love that you brought up Egypt. And, one thing that made me like the, it was the catalyst that which made me realize that I wanted to do social work and living and modeling humanity very much differently from my past life. It was when through my study, I learned about the inscriptions that were on the ancient Kemetic, which that's how ancient Egypt was referred to as Kemet. Um, the ancient tubes, the tombs, they had an inscription within it that says, "Man, know thyself." And when I started to really look at some of the different scholars, um, Milana Karenga, and so many different other ones, where they really peel back the mystery system of Kemet of ancient Egypt. The basis to the triangle law of nature, which is being, uh, knowing, and doing. It The basis of that is self knowledge. It is improving. It's what they refer to as the mastery of self. That is the basis for anything and everything that you do, and it never stops. No matter how. Now, if not if you graduate all the way through priesthood. Doesn't matter if you become, a highly technical engineer, mathematician, etc. If you decide to go the traditional healing and herbalism route, it keeps going. And that's what led me to start thinking about liberation, just as they thought about liberation, and then the other luminaries and liberation leaders, how they brought forth, how they taught and modeled liberation, um, and is really looking at that self, because in order to organize and in order to create unity and group harmony, is that there has to be a shared concept of of our ideals, of our values, of the principles that help these values come to life, and also what is it that we are trying to achieve? What is our thrust for survival? And so that's why I'm a firm believer, especially within all mental health professions, helping professions, is that it's not merely just knowing. It's not good enough to just know your biases and your prejudices and all of that. It's to actually know how your psychology was shaped through history, through experience, how your very nature, culturally, and your essence culturally, what, how was that formed? Was there any ruptures? Was there any, what were the sources to repair it? And so that's where it becomes very important. It becomes more than just about just how we as an individual understand ourselves, but it's also how we understand ourselves within within the context of community, culture, and greater civilization.
Hmm. Yeah, it really is. And I think people oftentimes we struggle with that, especially as social workers who, if someone's working kind of more of a traditional social work job and they are so busy and so consumed in their mind, I think people don't even think they have the time or the capacity to think about what is their community context, their cultural context, their
Mhm,
ancestral context, all
mhm,
of this stuff. Um, but but I also think it's not true. It's just a
mhm,
lie that we've told ourselves,
mhm.
and we get caught up in that system of just doing, 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 and then we forget to just be and to again learn and go in within and learn our history. But do you have any advice for
Yeah,
people that would have maybe not the same situation you're in, but similar, where they've gone through school and they're in a career that they thought they kind of aligned with, but they're thinking there's something else. I need something else. Do you have any advice
absolutely.
for people in that position?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there has to be the realization that um, all institutions, whether school, medical, carceral, etc., that they all have been active participants in systemic oppression and the dehumanization of people. So you need to realize that. You can't just sit there and say, well, I'm different. And so therefore, or times are different. So therefore, the culture of this institution um, is different. You're being very naive. And I know I was very naive. And so you have to realize that when you are participating, whether if it's economically, financially, for whatever reason, is that you need to understand where not only where you stand within that system, but also you need to understand how that system affects and impacts the masses. You got to be real with yourself on that. And then I would also say, in the words of Ptah Hotep, is and he was an ancient Kemite, and he said, "Follow your heart at all times," because the seat of intelligence and that quiet voice of morality and ethics is the heart. And so if you are getting what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, where what you're doing is not aligning with your self-perception and your ideological framework, then that means that that's something that should not be compartmentalized or suppressed. That discomfort and that disconnect is telling you something about how you and injustice um, are in complete opposition with one another. And so that would be my advice, is to realize that oppression is not abstract. It's not. It has faces to it. um, and that systems of oppressions have multiple faces to it. And we must understand that regardless of what we do, is that we all are um, affected by it, either directly or indirectly. And that the way through is to examine, to explore, to interrogate, and to interrogate that dissonance, to use the heart as the seat of intelligence and the seat of judgment and discernment. And then, um, yeah, and then, find the best way to redefine reality in your own terms. If that means that I'm still going to be a part of the system, yet I am going to be more open and communicative about my value system, then let that be what it is. If it's I need to walk away like I did because I can't rationalize being in this power structure of destruction, of death, and dehumanization, then do that with faith and courage.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think it's important to really highlight what you said now and before. Of this wasn't just a one day decision and then you have to act. This was over years and years where you were able
Yeah,
to have that kind of revelation, but then work on your own knowledge and self actualization and worldview, and then take a step. So people don't have to think today, okay, I got to get out of this job. You can start having that process, but then
yes,
start working on yourself so you know what path you want to take. Because I think that
agreed.
sometimes we don't know what path.
And
And that's when you don't know what I have learned through spiritual guides.
Hmm.
I have learned through um so many people, my band of black women that teach me and mentor me all the time. My wife, my sister in spirit, my mother in spirit, um, and even just through just stillness and quiet, is that I realize is that not everything requires a immediate resolve. And so what you're saying is very, very powerful. And I know that that can be quite concerning when there's, if especially when there's psychological, emotional, spiritual distress. And is that like, oh, I need to have a solution. I need to know I need to know what to do. I need to know how to maneuver. And sometimes the best way to do things is not to react in fear and anxiety. And the best way is to, um, like what you teach, how to somatically regulate yourself,
Right.
somatically regulate yourself, and calm your nervous system so you're not making irrational or haste decisions. And again, it's also the process of unlearning and relearning and learning. And so therefore, no, it's not going to be a day, a week, a month. It may take like me, 8 years. It
Hmm.
may. It may take more than that. I've met social workers who've been in the carceral system.
We lost him. Hmm.
State. And so be patient with yourself. That's what the revolution is permanent. It's not going nowhere. And that the more, and it's not just one person, it is a collective. And we need people who are in their best health, holistic health, in order to contribute positively, productively, and with intention.
mhm. And I think, it's worth having a little critique of social work and tying it into that it is and it contains systems that we're talking about these systems of oppression. And even if we start before social work, if we're looking at um, not too long ago, before TV and advertisements and all that, most people would have got much of their information from their parents, their grandparents, passed down through ancestry. You wouldn't have had all the distractions captivating your mind. And so I don't want to say it would be easier, but it would definitely be a different experience in being able to be in tune with yourself and listening. You said following your heart under all circumstances, which you hear still today. You hear even indigenous elders that are alive today that are more connected. You hear them saying that over and over and over again.
Mhm.
To follow your heart. And so when you're a child, I think that, at least for me, if I think about my own childhood, that being able to listen to my heart, it was there and it was pretty clear. And then you start to have all these contradictions that come into your life, and your mind becomes captivated. You're no longer listening to your grandparents, at least as much as you used to. You're in front of the television, in between whatever you're watching. It's inundating you with advertisements over and over and over again. I think in that Myth of Normal book, I think it said like 40,000 children, or by the time they're an adult, have watched 40,000 advertisements or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, anyways, so then to tie it to social work, so the mind's captivated, right? You don't have the same flow of information that you had before. The contradictions in the world and the systems that be kind of shut out that voice within inside you, whether you want to call that your conscious, your heart, whatever. And then you go and say you have somebody who wants to be a social worker. They have at least a light inside of themselves that says, hey, I want to help other people. Most people go into social work for that, oftentimes because of their own negative experiences, sometimes because they felt whatever reason they want to go out there and they want to make a difference in other people's lives. They want to help. But you get a social work, you're getting your social work degree, a bachelor's degree. People are going to take it at different lengths and in different ways. But let's fast forward into, say, you want to level up and you want to be a master, you want to have a master's degree, you want to be a therapist, or whatever you want to get out of that. Well, most people go through the advanced standing program, right, at a university, which means that they would take 5 graduate classes per semester, in addition to an internship, not to mention whatever the hell else they have to do to take care of themselves, their family, through paying the bills, through feeding themselves. Uh, it's not exactly an environment that leads to creating space to listen to your heart or to have this profound self reflection. So
Hmm.
social work as an entity, as an institution, we're not we're not set up in a way that produces that kind of an environment. And so you might have like a professor like me that is willing to step outside of those realms and create different opportunities for those. But for the most part, social workers, social work professors, aspiring social work students. So like even further, so you get your MSW, you graduate, you got some student loans, you're trying to level up again, right? And whether it's pay off those loans or put some money in the bank, work your way up to an LCSW, maybe you want to supervise. Well, I mean, the jobs that they're offering, if you look online, even you, how many clients did you see when you started out as a full-time therapist? 30 a week or
Yeah,
something?
25 to 30.
I work with
Hmm.
people a lot and I don't talk to them for an hour at a time, but it's exhausting for me to listen to what somebody has to say and meaningfully respond. And so if you're doing 30 a week, that's incredible. But even further, you look at some of those advertisements and some of them are advertising like you can make $100,000
Mm-hmm.
a year by doing 80 a week. Well, how are you supposed to see
Mm.
80 clients a week and let alone really help and pay attention to each one of those individuals, but then have that time to listen to your own heart and your own self-reflection. So all the way through, there's all these barriers, I would say, or the way that the social work system is set up that doesn't incentivize or even allow, I shouldn't say allow because it is possible, but it's it's kind of shutting out those opportunities for that. And I would imagine if we were to have, a real revolutionary social work educational system in place, that we would completely reorient ourselves and recenter ourselves so that the number one priority is for students to be able to have that space and the encouragement and the opportunity for that profound self-reflection,
Mm-hmm.
so that in order to change the world or to even help other people out, they've done so by doing that for themselves first and changing their own heart and finding the way back to that voice or that heart wisdom. Lots of people call it different kinds of things. um,
Mhm.
but for many people, I empathize with them because it's completely shut out for them, or almost completely shut out for them, because of all the things that they are forced to worry about to get where they think they need to be. And we've all been there to
Mm-hmm.
different degrees. What I would say to people um, in those situations is just create a little teeny bit of space, and you can create more and more and more. And you'll realize that you don't have to give so much of that attention that you thought you did in certain ways. There's ways that you might be able to cut corners in a certain class, or whatever, in order to create that extra space. And the last reflection I wanted to have on that is, as a professor and somebody who's been reflecting on this for a few years and trying to figure out a way to make it work, is that there's almost no incentive as a professor to operate in such a way. You're not measured by that. It's hard, like even a talking circle, right? It's hard if I'm justifying it to somebody else and that's worried about efficiency and things like that. They're going to say this is
Mhm.
the least efficient thing that you're doing, that you do. It's the least efficient thing that you could do. um, but you still have to do it. You have to
Yeah.
find that way, and through doing that, like, so for example, facilitating talking circles, not only is that opportunity there for the students, but I'm having that opportunity over and over and over
Mm-hmm.
and over again, and it continuously revolutionizes myself.
Yeah.
And so you have to just find little ways to create space. And if it's just a little bit here and a little bit there, if you're taking a little bit of time for yourself, whether it's to meditate or read up on something or do some ancestral work, or
Mhm.
commune with your brothers and sisters and have a reasoning session or talk story, whatever it is, just create that little bit of space, and you'll find that you can make more and more as you go. And I'm not going to lie, it can be exhausting, um,
Mhm.
but you can do it, and it's well worth
Yeah.
it. If I think about what we have now versus what we had when our hearts were a little more quiet.
Mhm.
um, I can't even. It's not even something that I can put into words. And I think you have a quote on your. I can't remember the exact quote on your email, but I think what a lot of people don't realize as well is that you have the opportunity, or you have the power to facilitate or create your own reality. And I think that so many of us don't realize that was doing, when I was not doing well and I believed I was cursed, I was reinforcing that worldview. But when I changed and I started to see things a little bit differently, I think Angela Davis says it well, because a lot of folks, like say in recovery, use the serenity prayer. God grant me
Mm,
the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. That's powerful because it has humility in it, and it lets you know that you can't control everything. But I think it also um, restricts us from knowing the power that we do have for change, especially within ourselves. And so Angela Davis said, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I can no longer accept.
longer
And you can't
accept.
change the
Yeah.
entire world just
No.
right today,
No.
but you can start right inside of your own heart by listening. And you take that step, and it's just miraculous how, as time goes by and you listen more and more, and you put yourself in those situations and you do the work, the transformative ways that our lives are changed individually, our family, incorporating into students, incorporating into your clients. And those are the seeds that I think you were talking about a little bit too
Mm,
earlier, Brother KD. Those are the seeds that are thrown out there. They just don't happen like this. They take
absolutely.
time to grow, and somebody's going to come back to you later and say, wow, that thing that you said to me, Alicia, and
Mhm.
what you enlightened me to at that time, they're going to come back to you in a couple years and they're going to say, you know thank you for that, and I'm sure you've experienced it.
Yeah, that's the fuel that keeps the work going for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I definitely want to take this moment, Ace, and really say that I definitely, you mentioned recovery and feeling cursed, and you know, I too, um, I used to drink very heavy, and I self-sabotaged, and I did a lot of self-destructive things, and I had a very self-destructive consciousness for quite a while, and I finally, I never went for myself to like an AA meeting, but my I used to go with my mother, and I remember that serenity prayer. I remember they used to say it in the beginning of the session, and sometimes at the end. And um, I re- I recall kind of like my realization of self power is when I started to, and I say this a lot. I say this to my children, and I say this to people that I do group work with, is that because language and words are the impetus for creation, for the impetus that enacts will, um, that you have to go through a deliberate process of redefining concepts for yourself.
Hmm.
And when I started redefining concepts for myself, for example, like education, when I realized just how an education institution does not value the actual transformative and transcendent power of education, and that education, in essence, is supposed to bring out this illumination of the spirit, the illumination of the mind. And even though a lot of great professors like yourself who are doing not only the self-conscious work, but is also bringing that into the classroom, unfortunately, that's not enough. And a lot of students and a lot of people go through life in general, a lot of people going through in life just with these limited and narrow concepts that guide them through life. And so when your concepts, because your conceptual world is very important. It's vital. It's the way that we define love, the way that we define peace, justice. Some people think being political is related to voting and related to government activity. That's that limits the scope and the expansiveness of a concept. The concept of mental health, the concept of wellness, the concept of spirituality, and so I think that that is very important. Like when you say that, when I realized that I was not cursed and I had the self healing and the self generating power from within, that is a commanding of the will to transform. And I think that that's what we all have to do. We all have to realize that we can define our own terms. If we just merely say that love is this feeling, this felt sense, then we will operate in the world, excuse me, we will operate in the world as if love is this very this abstraction, this fairy tale desire. Now, if we look at love as more like mutual spiritual development, ooh, things change now. Things have opened up. So, okay, so love is not all about just romance and eroticism
Mhm.
and being exotic. It incorporates an actual mutuality of wanting to know and see the person beyond their physicalness. And so I think that that is a great way of just really showing just how liberatory it is to go from the thoughts of worthlessness and the thoughts of the the negative thoughts of I'm not good enough, to saying, okay, what is it that, I'm oversimplifying, but what is it that, how can I balance the external and internal um, locus of control? And I know for a very long time, even through from professors, there was always this dichotomy between external and internal focus of control, rather than just looking at it as complementary. Rather looking at it complementary, looking at it as forces that can balance each other. Well, it doesn't have to be one or the other, or I'm more oriented to external than internal. It can be like, okay, how do I, because I live in a material world, how do I be, know, and do within the material physical world, while also attuning to the things that are unseen, the things that are felt, the things that are sensed. And so I think that that's powerful of how you're moving forward, and you're modeling that to your students and to your children. So that's, yeah, I wanted to affirm that in real time, because yeah, because that's what this is about. And I want to make another point, is that in social work, I remember reading the mission of social work, and it talks about, and I'm paraphrasing here, about being advocates, and that social workers are advocates and supporters of those who are oppressed. All right. And so that's in the mission statement. Then that means that our particular paradigms must be oriented to, well, how do they become unoppressed? Not about putting the band-aid on the oppressed
Yeah.
just to fulfill their basic needs and basic necessities, but how does an oppressed people, marginalized, disenfranchised people, especially people who've been victims of scientific colonialism and who have been epistemically incarcerated, like how do we foster an environment where they can express themselves freely, where they can interrogate and really confront their socio-cultural realities and socio-political realities. And so I think that that's vital. I mean, social work to me, when I read that, I was like, oh, it's clear as day. it's, it's clear as day where we're supposed to stand.
Yeah.
It's just that I understand that through CSWE and the marketplace and all these other demands, that our roles and responsibilities and our functions have changed as well.
Yeah.
To me, that exposes one of the big contradictions of modern day social work is, um, I think that band-aid that you're talking about, that's the transaction. Social work has become a series of transactions oftentimes, and
Standardized transactions.
when you're
Standardized, yeah.
we're paraphrasing that mission, it sounds like social work should be relational, but that's actually quite often discouraged. And it can be, it's a complicated subject, but
Hmm.
it seems to me that it should be, less of a transaction and more relational. And that's one of the ways that you could get to what you're saying, brother KD.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely see that. And I think the kind of tying in everything you guys have said of the position I'm in now, which I 100% manifested, and that would be a whole other podcast if we went into all of that stuff, but is a position where I'm able to kind of mentor and supervise people in a way that is relational, in a way that's kind of role modeling the values that I want everybody to maybe not have, but I want them to be able to advocate for themselves. I want them
Mhm.
to place themselves first so they can continue helping people rather than just burning out, seeing 30 clients a week and then having no energy for yourself. Um, and put myself in that position where I don't have to be the one that's doing the disciplinary stuff or the kind of the policies and all of that. Um, which makes it very hard to then stay relational and stay human centered when you're in this big system. But I'm so glad that you pointed out that social work mission, because if we always go back to that, how are we trying to unoppress people? Then I think we're going to be able to shift the that transactional nature into relational. But again, I don't think that we can do that 100% within a system. We have
Right.
to do this in our own worlds and role model it, so then it does ripple out. And that's what I want people to get from the circle of self, is that healing is very healing, just health in general and well-being, is very unique to each of us, but it's also very expansive. I'm glad you brought that word up.
Mhm.
It's not this one thing, one path you have to go on, and the circle of self is about those seven different elements that you take it whichever way fits right for you. But
Yeah.
the my favorite yin and yang in there is the movement and the stillness. there's
Yeah. Yeah.
there's movement in our bodies and our minds and our energies, but to be fully on a healing path, on a wellness path, you also have to balance it with the stillness. And there's never perfect balance, but that these seven elements, it's playing with it. And I want people to take that from it. And so I'm glad you brought up that
Mhm.
expansiveness, but also becoming unoppressed is going to be in our own ways. And if we take something like the circle of self, is a way that we can help people unoppress themselves as well as
Mhm.
ourselves. Um, so I
Yeah.
just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful. The way that you tied that the circle of self into um, really acknowledging how's there so much complementary forces within the healing process.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes um, we have a visualization of what healing looks like. Okay, I go to therapy, I'll take some mental health days, and I'm oversimplifying. So apologies if I'm not hitting all um, the different actual realities of how people heal. But when we look at it as an actual continual, gradual process, that's tailor made, and that's the thing. And I think that's what I love about when I read yours on the Substack, is that you put in there exactly what you do.
Mm.
I like to have my feet on solid ground. I like to be in the sun. And even you, Professor Ace, when I saw that your post when you wrote about being in the sun and being outside, how that enlivens you and how that revitalizes your spirit. That in itself, right there, you are exemplifying relationality, and that I think that that's beautiful about healing, because healing is supposed to be relational. Healing is supposed to be done in the context of a collective, of a group, and that individual healing is supposed to is supposed to kind of enable, enhance, the group healing process. So
Mhm.
if you're sitting there and you're saying, okay, this is what I do for my circle of self, or the 7 pillars of the circle of self. Okay, what do you do? Well, I never thought about that. Like, I never thought about just, taking 5 minutes to myself. I thought I had to take I thought it had to be longer. Like, no, there's no time dimension for healing. Even if it's in the car and you're just doing some box breaths. I
Mhm.
mean, it is infinite. And I think that's what we need to realize, is that healing, the possibilities are infinite, you know, therapeutic with therapy. And therapy is not one way. I was having to
Right.
talk with a brother, Mark Tuggle. I think you guys probably know him, Mark Tuggle out of Harlem.
Mhm.
And we were talking about therapy. And we were talking about just how one dimensional therapy gets presented sometimes, as if the only way to get therapeutic effect is through the therapeutic alliance with a therapist. And him and I talked for like 30 minutes on it. Like, no, that's not the only way of getting some type of therapeutic effect for whatever distress or discomfort that you're going through, or dysregulation, really. There's so many different ways. And I think that's what's beautiful about this conversation, and how we are linking our worlds together, is what we're showing is the different contours of healing. We're
Mhm.
showing that. We're showing the different flavors, the different shapes, and the different patterns, that one can take. And so I think that's valid. I think that's super valid for people to go forward into their life, and affirm their dignity, and affirm, uh, you know, their 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 birthright, of freedom of expression, freedom of being, freedom of doing, and really connecting with that pre-trauma, self. And I
Yeah.
know that's very difficult, and I know that's probably another conversation. But a lot of it is, okay, I've been traumatized. I went through so much adversity. I went through so much, um, lovelessness. How do I recover from that? How do I make amends and reconcile those layers of myself who has been hurt and harmed? And so that's where a lot of liberation was. Where liberation is like, okay, like I have to I have to want to re-remember the pre-trauma self. I need to re-remember, um, how my grandmother dealt with, somatic distress.
Mhm.
And the rocking in the seat, or the humming. You got to get back to those times within your past, through your interconnected history, to really pull from that. Okay, this is how we cope with stress, how we cope with problems, how we cope with the multi, dimensional realities that are, um, disaffirming humanity. And so, thank you for really bringing that to light, because I, the circle of self, is a great model to show just how holistic and interconnected
Mm.
healing is.
Mm. Yeah. Sorry. Hang
You all
on.
right? You all right?
Yeah. It really is.
And I really appreciate you bringing up the term reconciliation,
Mm.
and I think it
Mhm.
ties into everything that we're talking about because, you know, we've had truth and reconciliation agreements or things written up. Dr. Matulu Shakur wrote one up. There's obviously the one South Africa and many more. But how can we expect a nation, for example, the nation that we live in,
Mhm.
to reconcile if we haven't reconciled with ourselves or with our own trauma or with our own past? And to me, that's where it goes back to revolutionary social work, is that we've got to reconcile with ourselves and
Mhm.
each other too. But we have to go through that reconciliation process, which I think you said, Brother KD.
Mhm.
It can be difficult and it can be daunting,
Yeah.
to think about and to look at.
And that pre-trauma itself, like you were saying, it may not be all in your lifetime. You may
Mhm.
really need to face that generational, ancestral, whatever it be, trauma. And that's hard. That's
Not
really
maybe,
hard.
I think, not maybe, I think absolutely.
Yeah.
And it
Yes.
can be harder for, it can depend depending on who we are and what we have available to us.
Mm,
It can be harder or easier to get that information, and
yeah.
some of us may just have to look inward to some
Yeah.
degree.
Hmm.
But I'd
Yeah.
say that's vital.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Absolutely.
think we've seen that. Not always
Absolutely.
easy, but vital.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can it's a discomforting, um, painful experience, and like you said, it can be difficult. I mean, even just family genealogy. I mean that.
Hmm.
I'm definitely not. I mean, I'm all for family genealogy, but I also understand the limitations and the resource restrictions that with that. I think basic what I'm really just trying to emphasize is that even if you are completely severed from your family memories and your family life stories, um, I'm an avid reader. I read all the time, and I will say that, and back going back to the great revolutionary Malcolm X, that is kind of what really um, nourished that seed that was planted at childhood was the reading of material and content that really kind of activated a dormant and restricted consciousness.
Mm.
And so I would even say if you're disconnected from your family history, no matter multi-generation history, is that you can definitely pick up some type of spirituality book. I read African spirituality. I read everything African spirituality, African history, because I want to know how the people, my people who um, developed the very first civilization, how they operated,
Mm.
and so if you go back to that time, you get a lot of answers. You get a lot of answers of what of the values and the principles that are important and vital to transformation and transcendence. And you also get information about how to um, how to heal and how to harness self healing. So yeah, I will always, and that was something that I was blessed to learn before social work and all of that. So I was going through the education program, and I was just overlaying that with my own African centered education. So I'm doing twice as much work. I'm I'm going through all these classes, and then I'm trying to figure out, okay, where within my cultural heritage does it speak about, you know, social disorganization or social dysfunction? Where does it speak about where does it speak about, psychopathology? And
Mm.
okay, all right. And so I find the sources. I'm big on that. And I think that that's part of learning too, is if you don't have the oral traditions and you don't have an elder to impart that knowledge to you, then you have to do like Sankofa. You got to go fetch it.
Yeah.
You got to go and get it and retrieve it.
You
And
have
so
to.
that, yes, that can be very challenging, but it is worth the process of being, knowing, and doing.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
It's one of the greatest gifts you've given to our family is Ace's love for reading is just spilled out on all of us. And now our kids are the biggest readers.
Yes,
They will
yes.
be reading all day long, and that's going to
Uh-huh.
serve them so well. All the seeds we're
We
planting, and they're going to continue
we
reaping
go to
them.
the library like
Yeah.
2 days a week. I got a whole bookshelf behind me, books spilling over on the floor is behind
Yeah.
me. I My children and I, like y'all, we will sit together on the couch
Yep.
and we all have a different book and we're all reading
Mm.
together. And so yes, it starts young, and that is part of the process of building on that self-knowledge and
Mhm.
thinking critically and creatively, so
Yeah.
It's funny that this little end of this conversation went this way because it ties in exactly how I wanted to wrap things up. I can hear my kids in there starting to be a little bit unruly, so we got to get off the podcast and
Mhm.
give them some attention. But here we're renting this house just temporarily right now, and it's kind of an eccentric house with lots of books in it is
Mhm.
part of it. And I noticed that they have this series of books in here, and the first volume, it had uh, 3 copies of that volume, and I was like, well, why do they have 3 copies of it? And I thought, but it's because when somebody comes over, that's the book that they want to give to somebody else
Mhm.
and send them
Mhm.
off with. And so that's my question to you: if you on your bookshelf, if you had to keep multiple, or if you were keeping multiple copies of one book that whoever came over, you wanted to make sure that you gave that to them and planted that seed. You know, for my students or whoever else is listening to this podcast, what book, or it doesn't have to be just one, but
Yeah.
what book would you give them?
It would be The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child by Amos N. Wilson.
Okay, I have to look that up.
The future of our people, our children, and the best way that we can help socialize them into a world where they can have power over their social, cultural, economic, financial realities is by understanding and by understanding their particular makeup. And that's how you develop education and training and all of that. And so that would be the book, The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child by Amos N. Wilson.
Mm.
Appreciate it. There's your seed, everyone. Threw you a bone. Um, I just want to say this conversation was beautiful, and I feel like we could have talked all day. And
Mhm.
I hope that we
Same.
can, can continue the conversation. You never know. We like to let them unfold organically, so you never know exactly. You might have an idea, but you never know exactly where they're going to go. And I feel like this conversation could have taken a number of different paths and still been as enlightening and as heartful and meaningful. And so, I see it in the future, but I hope that we continue this and take down some of those other paths and keep exploring. And this is what it's all about. And from my perspective, revolutionary social work, I know I learned a lot and have
Mhm.
evolved my consciousness and my understanding of things today, and have many things that I'll continue to ruminate on and grow with.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. And I,
Thank
I
you.
wrote about this in a recent article of like myself as an introvert, I have to be very careful where I place my energy. And conversations like this give me energy. And
Mm.
I just appreciate that so much. It's again, same thing. It evolves my consciousness and opens up my mind further and further. So thank you, Brother
Ah,
PD.
wonderful. I'm honored. Thank you. My cup is filled. I am super grateful for the opportunity to converse with two kindred souls that are not only examples as parents, but also examples as professionals. And so I definitely see us crossing paths multiple times and
Mhm.
coalescing and communicating, and hopefully maybe one day meet face to face and
I hope
share
so.
a meal. So
Yeah.
um, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for carving out the time and space for us to coexist. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
And I think we can create that space to meet in person as well. There's all kinds of unique possibilities out there. And then I would also say,
Mhm.
just planting a seed, is that maybe we ought to write something and get it out there published together, and
Mhm.
I would love that.
reach a different, the more serious and professional audience that's out there sometimes.
I would love that.
Plant more
Yeah,
seeds.
yeah.
Yes.
Hmm. Thank you so much.
Well, you have a
Right on.
great day. Thank you for giving us your time, blessing us with your time and your wisdom
Yeah.
today, and we'll be in touch soon for sure.
All right now. Yeah. Peace and
Take
blessings to
care.
y'all.
All right, peace.
Thank you.